Thank you, and I'll welcome the panel to come and join me on the stage. And if everyone could take their seats. Thank you. And I'll give a little setup to what we're going to talk about tonight. And and it's important. Humanity. We're facing many extraordinary challenges over the next decades. The stakes couldn't be higher. And if we reflect a little bit, that since the middle of the last century, we have created technologies that put our fate and most of the planet's species into our own hands. Yet so far, we've managed to somehow avoid the instantaneous catastrophe of atomic warfare, but now recognize that we're lurching ahead into other potentially devastating consequences of human activities. Global warming caused by human activities threatens widespread change in our planetary conditions. And scientists have been telling us about this for a number of years. In fact, Charles Keeling at the Scripps Institute of Oceanography, part of my home institution of UCSD, began measurements of carbon dioxide levels in the atmosphere in 1958 and cautioned us that their rapid increase would trap atmospheric heat and that would have profound consequences. So these issues, since that time, have become hotly debated. And there's been some behavioral change, but perhaps it's been more symbolic than effectual. So the question is, can we, as a species, truly grapple with a problem that is unfolding across such long arcs of time and requires such complex social, political, scientific, and technological solutions? So what we're hoping here is to see how discourse across generations might illuminate what we need to focus on and how we might be able to solve and achieve significant results. And so today's conversation won't solve this problem, but if it does, I'm glad it's being recorded. And but we hope it's one small step for humankind in moving us in the right direction. And so our four panelists tonight that we're going to put into a conversation about this, we have Eli Schwartzman, who's an 8th grader at Parkland Magnet Middle School for Aerospace Technology in Rockville, Maryland. He's a budding inventor, a multimedia creator, a video gamer, which I particularly think is a very important thing to cultivate, and a jazz musician. We have, next to Eli, we have Cécile Rousseaux, who's a research scientist at NASA Goddard Space Flight Center, who's researching the effects of climate change variability on ocean biogeochemistry, amongst other multisyllabic words. Next to Cécile, we have Antonina Zakorchemna, who I knew I was going to mess up her name, even though I asked her 4 times how to pronounce it, who's a high school senior at the Freyberg Academy and is an aspiring astronaut and captain of the school's math team and robotics club. And then we have Anat Shahar, who's a planetary scientist with Carnegie Science, who's investigating planetary habitability. So a good crew to have a conversation about this. And so I'll ask a few questions, and we'll have some discourse and see how we can crack this nut here. So maybe I'll start with you, Cécile, to give us some perspective on what you think has changed in the last 10 to 20 years in the way we view climate change.
In the last 10, 20 years, I think we have, if we even step back further, like you said, I think we have gone from really starting to warn people about potentially what would happen to getting to 20 years. We have started, the uncertainty have really decreased in terms of what the effect that we were starting to see. We were starting to be really obvious, and I think now, we have seen the effect. We have started really living through it. The extreme events, whether it's a hurricane, are becoming more frequent, more often. We observe them more. The ice is melting. These events are there. It's just happening. There is no more, this might happen anymore. So
But do you see different responses in different parts of the world to these conditions?
Yeah, I think, you know, different country responds very differently to those problems. Some of them
Don't be polite.
I have to be. I think it, you know, different countries respond differently, and a lot of it is, of course, driven by the political aspect of things. And, you know, I'm not going to classify countries or anything because I think they're dynamical themselves. So I used to live in Australia, and when I was there at the time, things were dealt very differently than they are today, mostly in response to a change in, you know, prime minister. So things are changing everywhere, for the better or for the worse.
So Eli, in light of this condition, what topics do you think students should be learning about in school today to help them better prepare for these kinds of problems?
I think that students, along with the normal subjects that you learn in school, I think instead of having worksheets for homework, you should have an assignment that would be related to a current topic, like if it was science and you were talking about trees and, I don't know, something to do with trees, you would go around and learn about the trees in your neighborhood, and it would vary between each class, and it would help everybody realize what is going on in the world around us.
So maybe applying some of the more abstract ideas that you learn into real-world kind of practical explorations?
Yeah.
Oh, that's good. And so Anat, maybe you could talk a little bit about how, when we think about global warming, it puts a tension on just how precarious conditions for life on Earth itself is. And so so what is it about the Earth that has actually made it habitable, and what are we putting at risk by not paying attention to these issues?
Right, so the history of planetary habitability and why the Earth is even habitable to begin with is really complicated and is really a focus on the geology and the atmosphere of the planet. And so if we look at other planets like Venus, for example, which is about the same size as the Earth, but is not inhabited, the question is, why did the Earth get to its current evolutionary point, whereas other planets have not? And a lot of that has to do with the geology of the Earth, the fact that we have plate tectonics, the fact that we have the cycling of these different nutrients that go into the Earth and then recycle and come back out and create an environment for life to thrive. Venus doesn't have these plate tectonics. We also have a magnetic field that shields us, right, from this very intense solar energy that is constantly being bombarded at us. We have geology in terms of volcanism and atmospheric gases. So you talk about CO2. Venus's atmosphere is full of CO2, right? It's got this runaway greenhouse effect that we don't have because we have silicate weathering. So we have weathering of the rocks that then take the CO2 out of our atmosphere and put it back into the Earth at the bottom of the ocean, for example. If we change that by adding a lot more CO2 in the atmosphere, the Earth kind of gets out of balance, right? We have this balance of things, it's like a cycle. And when you change that, the Earth is no longer in balance and can't necessarily balance itself as quickly.
So you've described 3 or 4 really large-scale phenomena: plate tectonics, the magnetic field, atmospheric conditions.
Right. Oh, and liquid water. It's very important.
Liquid water. So our Goldilocks zone.
Right.
So so now that we're starting to, locate or discover exoplanets, how we probably still don't have a notion of their conditions at that level of detail.
Right. So, I mean, it dawned on me with that quote from Arthur C. Clarke about the things that weren't discovered, when you were 40 versus when you were 20. I'm looking at 40, and I think back to when I was 20 and how there were no exoplanets, or very few, and now there's thousands, right, that have been discovered. And so the question is, why, how do we know whether or not those planets are habitable or can be habitable? And a lot of it has to do with all these different variables that I was just describing. So do these planets have magnetic fields? Do they have plate tectonics? The problem is that for now, we can only see their atmospheres if we're even lucky. So a lot of research goes into trying to understand what the atmospheres look like, if we can even see them, and if we can then model how they got that atmosphere, and then back out whether or not they have some of these other variables that we're looking for.
Yeah, so again, as you describe these phenomena, particularly as you describe plate tectonics and the kind of cycling of between the land and the water and the atmosphere as this kind of dynamic system, perhaps it's that dynamism that has allowed life here to thrive and complexify and diversify. And I wonder if you think about, is there even more kind of fertile planetary conditions to promote the conditions of life and its complexity?
So it's a really interesting point. I mean, I think for life to thrive and diversify, you definitely need to have this dynamic surface. You need to have the land and water kind of coming together in the way we do on Earth. But you also, in order to diversify, you also need to change something, right? So a lot of the diversification on Earth, some people think that it was due to after some sort of big geological event, either an impact or some sort of big volcanic event where things were wiped out and had to kind of come back to life. There was a diversification in that coming back to life, right? So maybe there was one species there before, but after this big volcanic eruption, suddenly, lots of other species came. Kind of like when forests want to come back, they have a fire, right? And then you diversify that forest. And so if we could somehow find a planet that has, we think that impacts are, probably everywhere, but if we could find plate tectonics and volcanoes, for example, on other planets, then they would be more likely, I think, to be diversified.
So Tonya, how much influence do you think teenagers and youth have on kind of these issues of global warming, getting us to think about them? And how might youth and teenagers become an even more powerful and potent voice on this issue?
I think the time when youth and teenagers were perceived as immature, childish kids who are not able of intelligent future thought, are not perceiving the world the way adults are, is long ago gone. And now the teenagers have proven to be not only passionate and creative and talented, but also have proven to be capable of making the positive change in the world and showing their voice and making that voice to be heard in the world. So I believe that, especially in the last few years, the role of youth and teenagers increased drastically. We are heard, we know that we are powerful, and we know that our voice matters in the world as much as everyone else's does. And on the most basic level, why do we care about climate change? Earth is our home, and it is our future that gets directly affected. It is the matter of how we will live in a few years, in a decade, affected by the climate that we're neglecting right now. So I think that for the youth and teenagers, the climate change is one of the top priorities because they want to see the world bright and vibrant, and they want to have this perception of the home as a safe and healthy place to live. And so I believe that when youth is mobilized, they are capable to change what they want to achieve, and that right now we are empowered enough to have influence on that.
Yeah, and I wonder in particular too, as we see this really drastic change in means of discourse that's been taking place over the last decade in particular. These new avenues of discourse tend to be first engaged and used by teenagers and youth, and everybody else kind of reluctantly finally gets their own Facebook page. And now, of course, my 18-year-old, 17-year-old daughter Facebook, that's what 20-year-olds use. It's all Instagram and other things. So I imagine these kind of new channels of discourse might be something that can be used by youth in more effective ways as well.
There is a big benefit in our generation because when we were born, the technology was already here. So we were born in an environment that was changing every time, that we knew what is a telephone, we knew what is a computer when we were young, and we are raised with this understanding that technology is the important part of our life and we are enabled to use it. So I believe that the benefit of use and the perspective of how we can change the world in the future is that our ability to use technology is something that is embedded in us because we were born with it in the environment that already had the technology. So it starts from the most obvious things. We can, when I was, last year, I was a high school junior, and what I did, I created a mobile application that helps the users to receive the guidelines to promote the more efficient energy usage. So it would give the guidelines on how to lower the electricity bills and save the environment. And I was able to do that because I knew how to use the technology. I knew how to make the mobile application because I was born with that understanding around me. And I believe as we go further, we have more of that technology empowered ways to change in the future.
Hear, hear. So now here we are with this, having this climate change discourse that's, now very widespread. And, but you always, every time you were mentioning the hurricanes, we have, like this year, every hurricane that came along was like, this is the most intense hurricane that has ever happened, and then until next month when this is the most intense hurricane. So we think about like what are some of the indications that we currently have about climate change, and we can think about like, well, in 100 years it will be like this, but what should we be consciously aware of looking for over the next 20 years that will indicate that the severity and the pace of the development of climate change? Do any of you have any ideas?
I'm happy to
Yeah.
have a shot at that. I think we're going to go more and more towards looking at feedback process. So instead of focusing on one single aspect of climate change, the effect it might have, we're going to start seeing positive and negative feedback on things, and that's going to completely, and it is already changing the whole way we look in terms of research of climate change. Instead of looking at, oh look, we have carbon dioxide that increase, temperature is increasing, ice is melting. Now we are looking at a whole atmosphere, land, ocean. We are taking large-scale Earth system models, we are running them on supercomputers. We are looking at feedbacks between the clouds, the solar irradiation, the ocean, what's inside the ocean, the upwelling, all of that is being put together, and we are now looking at what the end effect is and what happens when you change one of those variables on all of these processes, which we couldn't really do 20 years ago because we just didn't have the technology, the computer requirement, all of that. So that's...
How about our ability to, you talk about the fusion of data from many different kinds of systems that now come together, but I'm also struck by the ability to better understand the global human condition that correlates with that. So the ways in which some of the things that you were talking about with technology, or the ways in which you're thinking about how the citizens can go out and do direct science or be a part of science in the world at large. These kinds of on-the-ground observations and engagement. Do you think this might become a more potent tool in confronting issues of climate change? Anybody?
I can do it again. I don't want to monopolize the whole floor, though.
Eli, you want
Eli?
to think, does that strike you as anything that, going off of what you were saying about going out and looking at the trees and thinking about how kids across the world might come together?
I think it would help with what people really think about the problems, not just around them, but like what's happening on the other side of the world. Mm-hmm. And if they like find something that they might be doing this for a few years, if you're lucky, and they might see that this tree now has shorter roots. This tree now has less leaves, and that may be because of the impacts of other forces around it.
Well, and it's a tricky issue to try to think about what local discrete events mean in relationship to large-scale global phenomena. And it's a hard thing, I think, just for the way we've evolved our mental, sensory, systems to make these kinds of connections. And so how is it, maybe, Anat, how do you think science itself can change or needs to change to maybe better address questions that have this scale of the scale that this phenomena has and the complexity it has?
I was listening to what everybody else was saying, and it really, I think, goes back to the way that we do science and the way that we were taught how to do science. So throughout your whole career, you're kind of taught to specialize and to focus. When you finish graduate school, you need to be the best at something. But I think that a lot of what was said here just in the past few minutes really shows that that's really no longer the best way to do it. That in order to really get at these big scale problems, you really need to be able to speak the jargon of several disciplines, and you need to be able to cross-communicate with people in other disciplines and in other countries and in other totally different disciplines outside of science. So there are several universities, for example, where they build these multidisciplinary buildings where they have all different types of scientists and social scientists. At the Carnegie Institution, we have 6 departments, and we try to all kind of work together, even though we can't always communicate perfectly, right? But the idea is that we have to all come together if we're going to understand how this is affecting the Earth as a whole. And we can no longer be those scientists that kind of tinker alone in our labs and figure things out. And we're going to need the people who know how to write programs in Python or whatever the big new program will be in 10 years, right? And we really need the apps, and we need somebody, on a cell phone in the middle of nowhere to tell us that they see something, that we wouldn't normally see. So I think it's really just the coming together, and I think social media is a good example of this, right? People coming together in ways that they just weren't before.
Just to build up on that, for the high school, we can even implement a more general way to look at the science. For example, if we take the biology lab, it's usually focused only on one special, small area of biology. We're just testing the photosynthesis. What if, instead of trying to nail down to only one specific area, we take the chemistry, take the physics, and we model the atmosphere of the Earth in the lab in the high school? What if, instead of writing the code in Python, I took AP computer science last year, and we were writing codes for computer games all year. What if, instead of writing computer game that we'll probably forget in like a week, we'll write the simulation, how does carbon dioxide affects the atmosphere of the Earth? Wouldn't that be a much better way for the students to understand the global influence of what we're doing right now, and how they can use science not only to nail down one specific area, but how to solve the challenges in a global scale?
So, so now maybe let's think a little bit about this as a technological issue. And so is there, so Eli, you were thinking a little bit about what might be alternatives to the energy technologies that we are currently using. What do you think might be better alternatives for non-carbon energy sources?
Well, right now, there are some other options like hydrogen, but I think the most effective option would be putting two different types of renewable energy together. So if one were to fail due to some sort of current climate event, like a drought, the other one could sustain the entire area that it needs to handle.
So we need redundant alternative technologies, and not just not depend on monotechnologies.
Because then we will have like a less chance of having power outages, because then right now we're relying on one source, and in the future we could be relying on 1 stage, 2 stage, 3 stage, and we'd never have this problem.
So it strikes me when we think about like carbon technology, carbon-based energy technologies as being a major contributor to this problem. Well, it's not the only greenhouse gas that's a problem, but agriculture puts a lot of greenhouse gases into the atmosphere as well. But one energy technology that sometimes is discussed as an alternative is nuclear power. But nuclear power has its, maybe carbon neutral, but maybe it has its other issues. I live down the road from San Onofre nuclear power plant in California, which is perched precariously right on the edge of the ocean. And it was irreparably damaged a few years back. So it ran for about 50 years, and now it will take an unknown amount of time to actually decommission it. Maybe 1,000 years, who knows? We don't know. There's no real answer to that. So is that a gamble that should we be placing bets on technologies like nuclear energy that to get us out of this dilemma, to possibly take us into another dilemma? None of you are nuclear engineers, but maybe it's not a fair question, but maybe our youth representatives want to know if that's a bet that we should be placing.
I think that we are the creators of technology. Technology is our creation. So it's not the matter of technology being bad, it's the matter of how we make this technology and how we use it. So I think that nuclear power can be an alternative source to reduce the emission of CO2 and methane and other greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. It's just the matter of how properly and how efficiently we use it and how much effort we put into making sure that the nuclear power and the possible solutions for the greenhouse gases won't affect the planet negatively after we use them.
But it's maybe one of the larger questions about human activity and the kind of extent of understanding the effects of human activity that now move beyond the locally spatial and locally temporal kind of scales to things that have quite extraordinarily long-term outcomes and impacts. And so another kind of question that comes up around, or another solution for our climate change dilemma is geoengineering, is that we can technologize ourselves out of this mess. What are your perspectives or thoughts about the potentials that things like carbon sequestration, I was not going to say that word, carbon storage can have the potentials for technologies like that to help us remove the human impacts that we've already had upon the planet. Anybody?
Geoengineering, the latest, I think, big thing that people are talking about. I think a lot of people are still unaware. I was talking to a colleague of mine actually today that was like, really, we do that now? So it's that thing where there is a lot of different things that are suggested. One of them is, for example, because I work in the oceans, that we could, for example, dump a whole lot of iron, for example, in the ocean, which would generate something called phytoplankton to grow. Phytoplankton is the equivalent of trees, but in the ocean, so they take up carbon dioxide, convert that into oxygen, and on top of that you get organic carbon for higher trophic level. So the idea is you dump a whole lot of iron, you have a lot of phytoplankton, that takes up your carbon dioxide, that sinks it, you have now offset your carbon. Now that carbon dioxide has gone to the deep ocean. And for that specific solution, for that specific case of geoengineering, the question is, how long does it stay there? And what will happen when it comes back up? That's one example. The other examples include things like we spray seawater in the clouds, and that increases its reflection. And so the amount of radiation coming down to Earth decreases, and so it's not as warm. All these things are, at first, a really good idea. It has the effect that you were looking for. Every time, the long-term consequences are highly uncertain. We don't know really how convenient it will be in 50, 100 years from now. And it's, I always compare that a little bit to was introduction of species that we have done. The rabbit in Australia, where we were like, yeah, that's a great idea. And then it turns out, no, we didn't think it through, and it was a fairly big mistake. So yeah, I think it's some ideas are good, and the problem is going to be that there's so many feedbacks, so many processes involved that I don't think we will be ever certain enough that we're not going to cause a different problem by doing these things. But you know, research. I do think there is place for technological development and things that we can improve to, you know, alternative energy and things like that. I think starting to engineer the climate, it's going to be challenging.
I would add that there's probably no silver bullet, right? There's probably not one technology or one mechanism that will fix it. And if we put all our eggs in one basket, we're really, I think, going in the wrong direction. And so I think research is really important, and I think in order to do the research, you need money, and you need money from agencies that want to study it. And so you need a government that will help you with that, right? And so this is a world problem, and this is something that the world, I think, should take up. But I would agree that the Earth is resilient in many ways, but it also works on a geologic timescale, right? So something that you do now could maybe not be a problem for 15 or 20 years or 500 years, but then suddenly it becomes a problem. And so you really need to understand all these different cycles and feedbacks in order to get at this answer.
So if saving the Earth is a dilemma, how much effort and activity and hope should we place on going to Planet B?
I don't think there is a Planet B. For me and for my children, I don't think there is a Planet B. I really think we should focus on saving the Earth as much as we can. None of these other planets so far have seemed very hospitable that we have found. The closest one doesn't seem like it's so hospitable. It's getting bombarded with solar radiation a lot. So I think it's great to think about what we can see in the solar system and what we can learn from exoplanets, but I think we should focus on living on Earth for now.
It's a long drive too.
It's a long way to
It's a long way to the closest one. So.
Well, and what about instead of maybe geoengineering Earth, geoengineering someone like Mars? They think that's another way. We've always often kind of used Mars as this kind of stand-in as an alternative Earth. So as our space missions and our billionaires, try to set their sights on places like that, perhaps that's some of their ambitions.
I think our billionaires should be not should, they should do whatever they want. But I think, I think it would be great if they gave some money into understanding why the Earth is habitable, for example, and trying to understand how other planets could be habitable. So if they want to find life elsewhere, a lot of the research that we do is focused on finding life elsewhere, and it drives a lot of our thinking. In terms of humans, our species, living on another planet, I think picking us all up and moving us somewhere else is very difficult. And the sad thing is that the people who are most affected by climate change are the poorest people, right? And so when we're talking about going to Mars, we're talking about, the person who has the money to go to Mars. So I fully believe we should be looking for life on other planets for other reasons, but I think we should focus on saving our planet as best we can.
And how about you guys? What are your thoughts about the potentials that we may be able to engage with planetary exploration, understanding worlds beyond this Earth, and what value that might give to life on this Earth? Tonya?
I am very excited about space exploration. I want to become an astrophysicist, and I definitely enjoy all the process of going and searching for life at the other planets, but I agree that the Earth is our home, and we should focus as much of our effort and our time and our resources to make the Earth as habitable for our future generations as it was when we came.
Great. Eli, do you have any thoughts on that?
I agree with what everybody else has said, and I think that we should start on a smaller scale and then try to help those that cannot find the solution that they're looking for. And it may just be the way that we save Earth and not have to go somewhere else.
Good. So now I'd like to maybe take some questions from the audience for our panel. And someone's running a mic around, and maybe we could have the house lights up a little bit so we can see. Joe, are you running a mic around?
Yeah, there is no microphone that's going to be brought around, so
okay.
either speak very loud or please go to the left and the right aisles there and ask your question.
So, any question? Yes.
Hi, thank you so much for the interesting. Hello.
Yes.
Thank you so much for the interesting forum. I think recently there was a lot of media reports on how we might have missed the boat in trying to reverse climate change. What are your views on that? Thank you.
Is it too late for us?
We could tackle the problem that way, but that's a dangerous way. Or we could just say we can do everything we can in our power and see what happens. I think saying something like it's too late, it's not fair on this generation, for one. And B, we don't, we can't just give up like that. That's just, I think there is still a lot of things to do, to understand, to discover. There's a lot of things that we can develop technologically. There's a lot of things that we don't understand yet. So, I absolutely disagree with that.
I also want to add that there's no reason to give up, and as I'm really optimistic about this problem. I think that is a huge challenge, but the huge challenge means the huge opportunity. So if I think we have the technology, we have the base, so if we allocate all our resources and put all of our best brain power into tackling this challenge, we will be able to solve it. But I think what is the missing component of not taking the climate change as seriously as it should be is the attitude. I was I'm taking the computer science internship in New Hampshire, and I live in Maine. And I was driving to my computer science internship, and I was listening to the campaigns of the people who were trying to get the senator seat in my state. And I spent hours listening to those. And never ever I heard about the climate change problem. None of them talked about it. I don't think we are taking this as seriously as we should. If we change the attitude, if we go to schools and we make the educational programs, if we focus our brain power, our strategy, our resources, if we globalize this and make it a worldwide challenge, it can be solved. And right now, it's possible to say there is no more way to reverse it. It's too late. But it doesn't mean that we have to give up. There's no excuse, no time for us to delay. We have to start it right now. We have to take the political support, we have to take the support from the people, we have to take the passion and the resources that we have, and we have to tackle this challenge with the best effort that we have if we want to live on the earth in a century.
Well said, well said. But it has been interesting, I think, as I've kind of reflect on this kind of rhetorical change that you've heard, that it's too late. And it's interesting that some of the voices that say it's too late now are the ones that just a few years ago said it's not happening. And so there's definitely something that's a little more nefarious beneath those kind of statements going on. And we have to be very cautious about giving over to those kind of self-interested, bad faith kind of views on topics like this. Yeah.
I won't go to the mic, but on your point on attitude, I'm thinking about both climate research, search for other habitable planets. Is part of the problem that we think of ourselves as a species, but we don't think of ourselves as Earthlings? So for instance, you're thinking about planet habitability. What if we discover that truly habitability, as we understand it, really is found nowhere else except here? Would the mind change of thinking of ourselves not as separate, we divide ourselves into different groups, but do we need to think of ourselves not just as members of a species, but members of this very unique planet, where we think of ourselves truly as Earthlings and try to think of ourselves as more in common than
I think we definitely do. If we say that it's too late, what does it mean? Is it too late for us to live? Does it mean that we're like saying bye and dying here on the planet? We didn't find life anywhere else in the universe. For now, not yet. For now, it seems like we are here and we are unique, and this is the Earth is such an amazing place where life could thrive, and we are the ones who have the chance to benefit from it, and we are the ones who have the opportunity and the possibility to take the most beautiful parts of the world and embrace them. But instead of doing that, we're polluting the air, we're polluting the oceans, we're putting CO2 in the air, and we're trying to prevent what was given to us as a great resource. So I think if we change the attitude to thinking that we are unique, that we are the part of the earth that can be found nowhere else, that would help people to understand how valuable the present resources are, and it would help them to take the climate change and the future of the earth more seriously.
Well, I think with that, I want to thank our panel for this conversation, and I especially want to thank our representatives of the coming generations who have now filled me with far more confidence about our future than I may have come in here with. So thank you guys.